Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Monday, March 14th, Lebanon City Council meeting. Our first order of business, the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, move on to the roll call members. Madam Clerk, call the roll, please.
Councilmember Kincaid.
Present.
Councilmember Campbell.
Here.
Councilmember Jones.
Here.
Councilmember Robertson.
Absent.
Councilmember Copeland.
Here.
Councilmember Wheat.
Present.
Councilmember Messenger.
Present.
Okay, now move on to the approval of the minutes from our previous meeting. Are there any changes or edits to the minutes?
Make a motion we approve the minutes.
We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion is second from Councilwoman Messenger. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Minutes are approved. All right, we'll move on to old business. The first item up is Ordinance 2022-05. Council to consider text amendments to the Unified Development Ordinance, and we have Ben Bontrager to present. And this is ordinance on second reading.
Good evening, Council. Just a little bit of recap from our last meeting. This is a text amendment change to the Thoroughfare and Overlay District section of our ordinance, Chapter 6, Section 1. That would add a prohibited use to the overlay district. And just a reminder again, the thoroughfares that are included in the Thoroughfare Overlay District are State Road 39, State Road 32, Indianapolis Avenue, and Lafayette Avenue. And what we would be doing is adding a prohibited use to that list, fueling stations as a prohibited use within the overlay district. A little bit of background again, just for a refresher here. I think the overhead's on. We'll work around the glare a little bit. This is a map of existing and or approved gas station locations. And you can see they're all located either on State Road 32, State Road 39, or Indianapolis Avenue. We have 15 existing and one proposed or approved gas station in the town. You can see they're well dispersed on State Road 32, State Road 39, both north and south, and Indianapolis Avenue. The thought now is that we're well served with the existing gas stations we have around those corridors, and wanted to prohibit those within the Thoroughfare Overlay District. I don't, as I kind of talked about last time, I don't envision this being a permanent change, but what this does allow us to do is over the course of this year, when we're going to be updating the Unified Development Ordinance, is to revisit this and figure out the best way to manage those. We do have some restrictions now. There is a restriction that suggests that we can have no more than one fueling station per block. Block being defined as one side of the street between any two adjacent intersecting streets. But that standard would suggest that at a standard intersection, then you could have a gas station on each corner of an intersection. So you theoretically could have 4 gas stations at an intersection because they're all on separate blocks. And that's not really what we're the highest and best use that we think of some of those commercial intersections. So we want to look at revisiting over as we update the UDO to figure out the best way to manage gas stations, fueling stations moving forward. Certainly as we grow to the south along State Road 39 or to the south with the Waterford development Steve Hankey's doing, we can see that there are targeted areas likely in the future where there might be a need for some additional fueling stations. We just really feel like our existing corridors are currently well served, and by prohibiting these now, it allows the opportunity to make those changes for those targeted areas that we see in the future. So that's a quick rundown of what we talked about last time. I know there's probably questions. I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Ben from council?
I have a quick question.
John?
On the 15 that you talked about, is the one on 32 that was discussed a couple weeks ago, is that one of the 15?
The one on 32 on the east side,
The new one that they talked about?
the Casey's gas station.
Yeah.
That's the approved one. It was shown on the map. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what's the 16, right? 'Cause it's 15 current and one,
15 current, one approved.
so 16 total.
Is one service station per 1,000 residents, is that excessive or
Yeah.
within target?
I think the answer is it depends. So, for communities on an interstate like us, we're probably going to have more per capita just because you've got the traffic with Interstate 65. If you compare us to a like-sized community that's not on an interstate, I'm guessing they probably have a lot less per capita. So it's kind of hard to come up with a real objective score, if you will, on how many per capita. Really what I'm looking at is on our primary corridors, are they is every corridor served with at least one gas station? The answer is yes. In some cases, in a mile stretch, we have 5 gas stations on the north side of Lebanon. So it's kind of hard to come up with an objective number per capita because the characteristics of the communities are different, and ours will probably be higher per capita because we're on an interstate, so.
Okay.
And that's also something we'd examine in the UDO process to, what's comparable, right? What's appropriate.
And 2 quick technical kind of questions. This is just the thoroughfares, right?
Yes.
So if somebody wanted to put one not on a thoroughfare, that would still be an acceptable use?
Yes. Yeah, so if there is a piece of property zoned appropriately for that type of use, and the thoroughfare overlay district is just only within 400 feet of the center line of these roads, if there's something that's outside that area, yes, it's still, so we're not totally prohibiting them in the entire city. We're really just looking at those primary thoroughfares, prohibiting them for now, and then so we can kind of take the time to figure out the best way to manage them moving forward.
And when do we roughly anticipate the UDO to be reviewed?
That's probably about an 8 to 9 month process, so if we can get started sometime in April, hopefully it's done before the end of the year.
Ben, do we have information already in existence about the size of a gas station?
In terms of restrictions on size? Yes, yeah, so right now, we limit it, I believe it's to, I think it's called 5 pumps or 5 islands, so you could have 10 nozzles in essence, based on what our, we do restrict size, we restrict proximity within the same block.
Any additional questions for Ben?
No, sir.
Okay. I'm going to have Rob read the ordinance, and then we'll have it open up for public comment.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Ordinance 2022-05, again, concerns an amendment to the text of the Unified Development Ordinance. The City of Lebanon Plan Commission initiated and proposed this ordinance to amend the text of the Unified Development Ordinance of the City of Lebanon. Pursuant to Indiana Code, the City of Lebanon Plan Commission conducted its required public hearing and determined its favorable recommendation on February 22nd, 2022 by a 5-0 vote, and then certified its recommendation to this council on February 23rd, 2022. Pursuant to Indiana Code, this council has considered the proposed text change amendment along with the recommendation of the City of Lebanon Plan Commission and now adopts the amendment and approves this ordinance by amending the text of the Unified Development Ordinance. And that's as follows. It'll amend the text of the Unified Development Ordinance, specifically Section 6.1.H, Prohibited Uses, Thoroughfare Overlay District, and that's described in Exhibit A. This ordinance shall be in full force and effect upon its passage by this council, and all other parts that are in conflict with are hereby repealed. Any portion of this ordinance that's found to be void or invalid shall not affect any remaining portions of this ordinance.
Thank you, Rob. Now the ordinance has been read on second reading. Is there any public comment concerning this ordinance? If so, please step forward and state your name for the record. We gotta go to the microphone for me. For those watching at home.
Joel McWaters, Lebanon, Indiana. I represented the buyers on 2 particular properties and done a little bit of research after the resistance from the city in regards to the fueling stations and tracked all the way back to 1960. I don't have a fancy overhead, but I brought a projector or a cardboard, and kind of where we're at, this is a generic drawing. I've got State Road 39 going north, 32 following. I want to show two things that are very important are the number of stations versus our population. The green dots represent the 1960 stations. Orange dots represent the 80 stations, pink dots represent 2000, and the yellow dots are the current stations that we have. And I'll leave this so you kind of see it.
If you want to put that kind of right there by the overhead, you probably can just stand up there. If you want to put that kind of up on that shelf, it might be able to see it while you're speaking. Kind of where the overhead, yeah, there you go. That fit there, maybe? Well, on the floor is fine then, yep.
Put it on that table, doesn't it have a camera on the table?
Yeah, there we go.
On the
That works.
table?
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
So in 1960, our population was 9,500 people versus 2020 is about 16,000. So we went from 1 to 300 stations, one station per 300 people, to one station per 1,100 people. I've printed the names of all the stations for, that was in each of my survey. I made 10 packets, one for everybody that's involved. I'm not really sure, I'm confused of why this is such a rush to pass a moratorium on gas stations. Are we gonna do this towards restaurants? A segregated business? Why the rush? We started our 2 stations in December of 2020. 2020. We're trying to build 2 stations that total $4 million to the city.
Thank you.
Just pass me that.
I just have one
Oh, okay.
on scoreboard.
Oh, okay. Yep, there you go. Yep.
So the benefits of future gas stations are the employees. We'll have 10 to 20 employees per station. Sales tax, fuel tax, federal money, state money, county money, payroll taxes. Property taxes per building is about $30,000 per building. We're building a $2 million building. We're replacing the eyesore at 845 Indianapolis Avenue. And that particular property, both properties that I sold, South Lebanon Street was on the market for over 1,000 days. And then Chuck's former property, which you guys voted to rezone unanimously, was on the market for over 1,300 days. This information come from the Robinson directories. I know that an elder statesman like Mr. Campbell is familiar with the Robinson directories at the library. They had them in there by a year. So the population shown, the traffic's grown. 1960, I-65 did not exist. Mr. Strahlmeyer sold his farm in 1968, and it took 10 years to settle on that payment for Red Strahlmeyer's farm to complete I-65. So that's all the information I have.
Thank you, Joel. Any questions for Joel?
Yeah, Joel, you said you represent 2 station locations?
Yes,
What-
on this drawing, Chuck Hunt's former property at 845 Indianapolis Avenue by Milky Way.
Uh-huh.
We've submitted drawings, prints, applications. 1013 South Lebanon Street, Ed Cooney property, vacant across from the church. No pumps at that property. Then the blue dot is Casey's. So in this research, you'll see there's only 4 buildings that stayed within 3 cycles of 20 years. Most of them last 30, 40 years. Are we going away from gas? Maybe. Our station can convert to hydrogen. Going to put 2 electric chargers at each station. Not asking for any tax abatements. No RDC money, nothing.
So to clarify, the property on Lebanon Street wouldn't be prohibited because it's not a fueling station, correct? But that's not But that wouldn't be prohibited because it's not a fueling station. We're only prohibiting.
There's some,
Yeah, fair, but that, I mean, I think that's a separate discussion though from this. It would still be a,
same owner.
okay, and also, and Ben, you can just nod in the back if this is correct. I mean, if it was all electric plug-in, it'd be also a permitted use. Those aren't prohibited either. It's just strictly the fueling. And again, this is a temporary kind of pause while we're reevaluating our overall UDO analysis.
I think it'd be against the Constitution of the United States to segregate against one business, wouldn't it? Mr. Shine?
I mean, the city has planning authority, and, I mean, we are the ones that can determine what we feel are appropriate uses of planning as part of having a planning commission, and that's a public process, so,
We
you
feel
know.
like this is the highest and best use for these two properties.
Okay.
So Joel, really the two that you're talking about are the one on Lebanon Street across from the church. That's just going to be a convenience store without gas pumps.
Correct.
So we're really not discussing that tonight.
Correct, yep.
The one that we're focused on tonight is going to be the one on Indianapolis Avenue that used to be Hunt's property. Is that like Indianapolis Avenue in Spencer, something
Yes.
like that?
Yes.
That's the one you're talking about for
Yes.
tonight? Okay.
Isn't that the same block, though, as the Casey's north of it? So it's already would be prohibited?
What's defined as block, 700
The-
to 700 to 799?
So the way our UDO defines a block is between the same side of the street, between two roads, right? So that one would be Grant Street and Spencer Avenue, is how we define the block in that area, if that's correct, Ben? Yes?
Was Green Street
Yeah,
on that side of the road?
Grant Street, and Spencer Avenue. So Casey's is already on that site.
So, let me ask you this. Was this, and you may not, I'm having trouble researching this, but we have Kroger and Family Express right next to each other, correct? Same block. Same block. I mean, it might not be your administration,
Yeah, that's,
but we're same block.
right. Again, that's, I mean, that's part of why we're looking at our UDO right now, because we don't think it's clear either, right? That's what I mean, by us saying we need to look at
You've
UDO.
tried, myself, Chuck, Mr. Mann, Jesse, and Sonny Mann have been transparent with Ben, yourself, all council members. This property was rezoned, unanimous. Chuck Hunt's property was rezoned.
But the rezone doesn't impact the use, right? And
But it should never been industrial.
Agree, and that's why we rezoned it, right? But it again, that gets around to our main problem with that site is that it's on the same block currently as a current existing gas station, which would be against our current UDO, right? So, I mean, Ben, I'm gonna look at you again, but there's a process to go through that. You can appeal to the
We're
BZA and.
600,000 in on property.
I understand that. And again, that's why it's acknowledged from the city standpoint that we need to relook at this issue to determine, I think our definition of a block is arbitrary, right? And we need to define that better. And that's part of this process. And that's kind of why we said, until we define this process, there needs to be a pause to resolve this.
One of the things, I'm going to put my realtor hat on. If I want to build a house or building or mini warehouse, I should be able to walk into Ben's office, Christie, hey, do you think this is a yes or no? Not guaranteed, but I shouldn't be 20, 30, 40, 50, 100,000 in and then told no. I understand we have a comprehensive plan.
And I understand your concern, but at the end of the day, the due diligence is on the responsibility of the property owner and the developer, so.
Can I ask, what is the appeal process on something like this?
Ben can touch on that.
Because the reason I bring it up, I look where Casey's is, and I look where the proposed site is, and I understand street to street, I understand that. But there's a factory in between them, and there's actually a factory parking lot in between them. So nothing against any office or anything like that, it just seems like there's an awful lot of property between these two that maybe a gas station couldn't go there. But I understand what Ben's saying. I do understand that.
This
Yes, sir.
particular property was a gas station from 1932 to 1986, based on my research at the library. 1932 to 1986.
There's several gas stations like that, and I understand that, but I also understand as time goes on, there's restrictions that come up.
Sure.
And as they go, just like your numbers have gone down from the 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever, to what we are today because of different ordinances and codes and stuff like that. So that's why we're worked those numbers down a little bit. And some of them have just worked themselves out, some of the gas stations, because they couldn't keep up with the other gas stations.
And we want to go above and beyond with our building, brick, limestone, split stone. It's not going to be an ephes. But, we as a community should let the community dictate the capitalist market. We're going to raise the bar so that somebody else remodels their current station. If you look at my notes, you'll see a lot of those buildings are old. Probably have steel tanks in them that are leaking. One-piece fiberglass tanks don't leak, can be converted over. So the benefits outweigh the negatives, in my opinion.
Any other questions?
Passed tonight, would they, at a later date, if they wanted to apply for a variance and come to, would that be an option?
Yep. I was just, there's more questions for Joel, and then I'm going to.
Sorry.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
I did want to point out a couple things. This text amendment that's before you tonight does not affect the permitted use on this property on Indianapolis Avenue. The gas station is already not permitted based on things that are already in the ordinance. So by passing this prohibition tonight in the overlay district, that actually wouldn't change anything that already wasn't permitted. And I did want to clarify a couple things. It is not a moratorium on gas stations. This is merely prohibiting them on those 4 thoroughfares. There are other locations that are zoned appropriately where a gas station could go currently. And again, this is intended to be a temporary issue so that we can decide exactly how to address those in the future. Just to address a couple of things, I think it was just suggested that owners should be able to dictate what goes on their property, and that would essentially mean that we would throw away zoning and just let people do whatever they want, and it's not really how communities address zoning. So I think there's got to be certain standards in place to provide guidelines for what uses are permitted adjacent to each other and what standards should be applied to those uses when they're there. In terms of the definition of block, the fact that there's a use in between it doesn't matter. There could be 6 homes in between there. It wouldn't change the fact that it's all within the same block. So our definition is property abutting one side of the street and lying between the 2 nearest intersecting streets, either crossing or terminating. So as the mayor suggested, the block there is defined as that north side of Indianapolis Avenue between Spencer and Grant Street. That is the definition of a block. Doesn't matter how long the block is, how short it is, doesn't matter what's in between it, doesn't matter if alleys are present, alleys are not streets. So it is one side of the street between the 2 nearest intersecting streets. The length of the block doesn't matter. So we've got some block lengths that are only 300 or 400 feet. We've got some that are close to over 1,000 feet long. This one happens to be about 700 feet long. So it's not even the longest block in the city. Those 2 properties, if you go from corner to corner, are only 300 feet apart. So there is a factor there, but it's actually behind those properties. These properties are approximately 300 feet apart. I looked at that earlier today. So there's not a whole lot in between them even when you look at it. So like I said, those standards were already in place. I know we discussed when the previous owner was selling the property, said, I'm talking to somebody about a gas station. I said, I appreciate that. Use would be permitted in the plain business commercial zoning district, but there's a lot of other standards that would be applied to that property that are going to make it pretty difficult to redevelop that as a gas station. So I'd make sure anybody that's looking to buy that property comes and talks to us first before they close on it, so that we can talk to them about what those restrictions are. I never talked to the current owner of the property before they bought it. So they did not do any due diligence before they bought it. So I understand they bought the property. I could have explained all these standards to them before they bought it and make sure they understood those. They have already filed a variance on that standard, the block standard, by the way. They filed it on Friday. That'll be in front of the BZA in April. So they are essentially asking for a waiver of that block standard. So that's something we'll be working through over the next couple of weeks. But that standard's been in place the entire time. It's not something we've changed. What you're looking at tonight does not change that Indianapolis Avenue side development.
So because they filed before this meeting, if the BZA grants their, essentially a variance request, because it was filed before this,
They have standing. Yeah.
they have standing, right?
So
So,
theoretically, even if you guys were to adopt this prohibition in the overlay tonight, because they have filed something previously, if the Board of Zoning Appeals were to approve that variance, they would have the ability to move forward.
essentially, then it's now up to the BZA to determine that site versus this. So, any other
Ben?
questions for Ben? Sorry.
Yeah, help me understand, okay, let's take tonight out of this. We're going to review the EDO in the future. What's some of the criteria we might add back, or how are we going to change it so that we don't have this discussion anymore?
I think I'm still trying to figure that out exactly. I mean, I know a number of communities have tried to create some separation requirements. So rather than just being like, again, like I suggested, our block standard, the way we have it defined now would theoretically allow 4 gas stations on the same intersection because they're all technically a different block. I don't know that that's really what our goal was when we established that requirement to allow that many at one intersection. So I think we may be could be looking at separation requirements. Maybe there's some additional design standards we want to attach to them. And there may be places where we would allow them within specific targeted areas where we can see as growth areas. Like again, at South State Road 39 is, the Fieldhouse project develops and other things develop around it. There's only one gas station there. Maybe there's needs for additional ones in that segment of corridor. And certainly as Waterford develops to the south, they're talking about a brand new interchange down there with commercial uses down there. It would make sense that in areas like that where we're developing further, where there would be target areas, it would make sense to put additional gas stations. So I don't know exactly what the answer is. I'm hoping our consultant can provide us some guidance with their experience providing these ordinances for other communities. So I think we're going to try to put some guidelines around it as we move forward.
So again, so I can understand this, if we pass this tonight and somehow the process gets held up, the review of the EDO, and this stands, then say Waterford goes, or the Fieldhouse, they're going faster than anticipated, would we still be in the same boat then, that they couldn't have a gas station down there because this ordinance is in effect?
Yeah, right now theoretically they couldn't unless they decided to come through to the Board of Zoning Appeals. So there's still a process.
Because anybody could technically ask for a variance from this prohibited
Yeah,
use.
this is not something like chiseled in stone necessarily. There's always a process where you can request to vary from standards. If there's some sort of hardship that exists, I think that'd be one where it'd be difficult to suggest a hardship.
I was going to say.
So the thing that you would basically have to say is that's the only use that could go there. There is no other permitted commercial use that could go on that site. And any other commercial use could theoretically go on the same site as a gas station could go. So it'd be hard to suggest that you couldn't do anything else on a site. So the variances are difficult on purpose to get approved. You have to be able to prove some sort of specific hardship. But I do think we do want to allow them in the future, but I think we want to set some appropriate parameters around them.
I think the wording is crucial in taking time to do that. I just don't want us to be in a position where somebody comes up and says, I don't want the money just to talk and dictate and override what the city. So I think having the proper wording and anticipating as many things as possible, knowing there's always these other things, but many times we hear where somebody says, I have already got this much money and like that, and then that's kind of a tough, because you're talking about money and you're talking about actual wording in a document that we call plans for the city. So I think having the proper wording, taking the time to do that would be very beneficial for us.
I'm sorry.
No, just give us some background on the question he brought up regarding Kroger's and the Family Express.
I have to go back and look at the history, though. I don't know when those stations were approved. Actually, we did look up Kroger, and I think they did have a series of variances for that. I don't remember whether this was part of it or not. I also don't know exactly when this text was added to the ordinance about the block standard. So I'd have to go kind of look at history of what came first.
Okay.
But that's certainly something we could take a look at. But yeah, a number of those stations predate our existing ordinance and are essentially grandfathered.
Thank you.
Rich, you have a question?
I actually forgot my question while I was listening to Mike's. I'll think of it in a minute.
Any additional comments questions for Ben? Last chance to remember?
Oh, I remember what it was.
There we go.
We're concerned about too many gas stations coming in. How many projects that aren't obviously committed, but we've heard, your best guess estimate, how many entities or locations is this going to affect?
People that I know kicking the tires, I can think of 4 very quickly that have at least explored this option, and I know others. I get inquiries on a monthly basis for other sites. I couldn't even tell you how many times that I've got inquiries from people about putting a gas station on the old Holiday Inn site that we own. I've had cash offers multiple times to buy that property. That would have been a truck stop 6 times in the last 5 years if you let it. But I'm aware of at least 4 that would be impacted by this in some way, shape, or form. Most of them have not gone to much effort in terms of designing a site.
Sure.
And none of them two of them I guess I've talked to directly, the other 2 I have not.
Yeah. And I guess one last thing, and then I'll be quiet. The concern is, Mr. McWater said, let the market forces sort it out. What's our concern from the city side if we have 30 gas stations and the market doesn't support that?
Well, our concern would be half of them closed, and we got a bunch more
Right.
gas stations.
But I mean, talk about some of the problems that we could face if we have that surplus of gas stations and some of them closed because of whatever, changes in technology or...
The biggest thing long-term is environmental issues and the ability to redevelop those sites when you have tanks in the ground. Those are always big challenges. I mean, we've run into, Derek's not here, but he could talk to you about how many horror stories we've had.
We use a lot of our brownfield money on those green dots.
Yeah.
A lot of it.
Historically, they're probably some of our worst sites in terms of environmental issues, and then trying to redevelop them is very challenging. And there's been a number of them where we've uncovered tanks in the ground that have been there for 50 years, and who knows how long they've been leaking, who knows what in that neighborhood. So, and I think, again, the mayor has brought up a good point previously. At some point, we're making a slow transition to other fuel sources. And so if we've got 30 gas stations and we only need 10, in 25 years we only need 10 of them, then what happens to those other ones? That's the big challenge.
In fairness, though, the modern tank technology is not like putting the old metal tanks in the ground.
It's definitely better, but over time, it's still an issue. It doesn't matter what it's built out of, it's not going to last forever. So, again, making sure that those are properly closed and things like that, and over time, making sure they're maintained is always a challenge. So.
Any further discussion?
No, sir.
Okay. This time then, I would entertain a motion concerning ordinance 2022-6. Sure.
You didn't close it, right?
No, it's not a public hearing, so I didn't know there's any more additional public comment, so feel free.
We have a couple things. Of course, I'm the former owner of the site, but you know what, really? That site has no bearing on your decision tonight. That's not what you're here to talk about. You're here to talk about one certain industry being banned from what would be their livelihood versus putting them on the thoroughfare where the most traffic is versus putting them on a side city street where the traffic's not there. Am I correct on that? I mean, we're not talking about my old building being approved tonight or anything to do with that. We're talking about banning gas stations, filling stations, whatever you want to call them, on the thoroughfare. Well, the few things that I've got a problem with that is we're picking one segment of business. What's next? Ice cream shops, pizza joints? Well, pizza places, I shouldn't say joints. But anyway, banks, guys, Ben has sat there and said over and over and over, he is getting inquiries for people to put filling stations. These companies are not no dummies. That's what they do. Most of them are backed by big oil. They know where to put things to make them work. So if they're wanting to come and invest in our city and they want to take my old building down, or there's some others down there I can point out, and they want to put up a new facility, when you come in that town, because they're all thoroughfares, I wouldn't see why you wouldn't want that. I really don't. You know, Matt, I talked to you before this thing all started, and I asked you, would it be nice to have a new building, facility there versus an old station? You know, and the thing about tanks is, you know, we talk about tanks. I paid to take them tanks out of that down there. And, well, let me back that up. Marathon Oil paid most of it. Me and my brother, Tom, we paid the balance. And it was a healthy check. But the big difference is those tanks were metal, tanks today are fiberglass. I worked, you know, for farmers back when in the 70s, when I was just still in school. I can show you fiberglass tanks that will probably be there another 100 years. They don't rust, they don't corrode, they don't deteriorate. It's a big problem in landfills with fiberglass. The other thing is, you know, you're worried about the old stations, new ones coming in, the old ones closing down. But if they close down, the tanks are still there. If they're operating, the tanks are still there. They're eventually going to leach out. We all know that. You guys have cleaned some of them up using your brownfield project. I mean, you know, but my really big concern is shutting down one segment of business. And the other thing, you've got the UDO that you're working on, or will be coming up. I went and I drove around and I looked at most of the thoroughfares. Most of those thoroughfares are in controlled districts anyway, by zoning. So, if they want to change that, they're going to have to come in and get certain variances. That's going to have to go before the zoning board to get the variances. And then it's still going to come to you down the road. Am I correct on that?
It depends on what they're asking for, but
Well, 99% is going to come right back here like I did. And, you know, the thing about it is, you're going to have to say then, yay or nay. To just sit there and blanket this thing, I just don't think, I don't feel comfortable with it. I don't think it's correct. And you people are councilmen, you're elected by your constituents, and I really think you do a good job. I really do. I think the city is growing, it's improving. Matt, you know, we've talked about this before. I like things you've done, some things I don't care. I don't like. But that's not it. It's not all about me, it's about the betterment of the city. So let's just throw a proposal out there. Let's just say Buc-ee's out of Texas wants to come up here and they want to build. Don't tell me you're going to turn that down,
I am going to turn that down.
because that would be a destination point. Well,
So my dad is desperate for me to bring a Buc-ee's to town. That's what he wanted us to do with the Holiday Insight. And I said, no, there's a higher and better use for this. And that's what we're doing in the field house now, right? So I get what you're saying, but, and there is a balance, right, of what we want to see in town, right, versus, you know, there is a free market too. But at the same time, we have these rules in place, and I think we've uncovered a lot of issues or concerns that we have about, you know, is our standard appropriate? And I think we've kind of come to the conclusion that there are definitely some gray area that we want to clear up before we proceed further. And that's, so the sensible solution is just, again, this isn't a prohibition, it's a pause. We're going to evaluate this as we go through the studio process. And again, as you said, they're not prohibited throughout town. It's very specifically only the overlay district.
okay.
And so if they want to put it somewhere else that's zoned properly, they can. But we want, as a council and as a city, we want to make sure we get this right, because we're on a tipping point, and what happens today is going to impact us for 30 years on this stuff, and this is a rapidly changing market. And no, we're not going to go ban ice cream stores, right? We're not doing that, because that's a general, you know, restaurant use, right? We don't dictate, you know, how many pizza places do we have, how many taco places we have. Trust me, I get all the feedback of, oh God, we're getting another pizza place in town. Like, well, they don't, I mean, people attend pizza places, they like them, right? Not even go out of business, right? So we're not dictating number of pizza places. This is a very specific use of filling stations, because it is a market in flux right now, and as we have said, there are issues that we have to work through as a city. I think it's better for us to pause to evaluate long-term going forward. That's what we're talking about tonight.
I probably shouldn't have used Buc-ee's because I know your dad likes it. But you know, the thing about it is, we're still back to what I originally started with, we're one second business. So you've got the UDO coming up for an update. I say you vote no, because you're going to have control of them areas anyway. 99% of it. The second thing about it is, if you're going to do it on the whole, all of it. Nothing goes in there without city council approval. No ice cream shops, no, and I should use ice cream shop, whatever business you want to pick. You know, no auction businesses, no nothing go in there without going into city approval. Because right now, it's to me, it's blatant discrimination. You have picked one segment.
Well, but we don't zone, we zone, as a city, we zone uses, right? We don't zone specific types of businesses.
I get how
And
zoning works.
I know you know that, right? But again, we're not talking about, we don't see a difference from a city standpoint between an ice cream shop and a pizza place or a hamburger place, right? It's all the same. But filling stations is a defined, specific use that we can have oversight on and control over, and that's something that we feel like we need to look at right now. And that's what this discussion's
It's
about.
not a defined separate use,
What?
a dress shop.
A dress shop is viewed in our same use as a hamburger, I mean, well, maybe not because it's maybe a drive-through, but, I mean, generally speaking, a retail and restaurant, they're all viewed the same way. Right? So it's not, we can't get in those grains, and again, we have a planning commission for a reason that looks at and applies our
I
rules,
understand,
not
and
the
I appreciate-
council.
I appreciate that, you know, versus just throwing a gas station in the middle of a new neighborhood we're building. I fully get that. But what I'm saying on these overlay districts, why just one segment of business?
Again, I think we've touched on that, but
I mean, you know, the other thing about it is, why the rush? We got the UDO coming. You know, why not, like I said, just vote no tonight? Everything's going to come before you anyway, before it's, you know, it's after it's go through the proper channels before. But
it wouldn't come before us unless it's a rezone, right? If it goes to the BZA and a variance is granted, that's approved. It goes to the BZA. That's not any council decision on that.
Most of those maps, most of those areas I did look at, like I say, I got out and done my due diligence. I went out and I drove, but the thing about it is, most of them have got some kind of hindrance in them anyway, you know, by whatever their zoning is, and things, setbacks and things like that. So it's going to have to go before the BZA on most of it anyway. But I just don't feel comfortable with this. Maybe you guys do. Maybe you guys just, I don't know. That's your vote.
Okay.
But, you know, the other thing about it is generated tax revenues. You know, it's they used to call them cash cows. They can't call them that now. Now it's credit card cows, I guess. But anyway, I'm asking for you people to vote no on this. That's all I can ask.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you for your time.
Any additional public comment? Ben, close?
I did want to address a couple of things there. Fueling stations are not the only use that is specifically prohibited in the overlay district. It would actually be item 22 on the list of specific uses that are prohibited in the overlay district. It is not the only market segment that is prohibited in the overlay district. We have a laundry list of uses that we have over the years decided we don't feel are appropriate for the overlay district, so this is not one. And frankly, zoning in general identifies uses that are and are not appropriate on every individual property in the city. So there already are guidelines on uses on every property based on zoning, but in terms of the overlay district, it's item 22 on a list of specific uses that have been decided by the city over the years are not appropriate in those areas. And again, like you said, I point out we're putting it in place now so that we have time to address these appropriately, and the UDO update, and that'll make sure that we kind of have a clean slate as we do that. I could suggest, you know, if you decided to say no, and then we know that at the end of the year there's going to be further restrictions, I don't know how many gas stations could come in between now and the end of the year and try to get approvals before that time. It could be all 4 of them, could be 6 of them, I don't know. But by doing this prohibition now, it just gives a little time to take a breather, get this right, so we know what those standards should be moving forward. So yeah, again, this is not the only market segment that is specifically prohibited in the overlay district. It would actually be item 22 on the list of uses.
What are some of the 21 prior to that?
It's in the attachment. Let's see. Used motor vehicle sales, drive-through establishments, where it's the primary use, farm equipment sales, airport, heliport, highway maintenance garage, radio towers, boat and marine sales and service, correctional institutions, sanitary landfill, sewage treatment, wholesale or industrial services, junkyards, raising of non-farm fowl, outdoor storage, mini warehouses. These are all things that are not permitted, and the list continues of uses that aren't permitted in the overlay district.
Ben, would it be considered unusual to amend the UDO?
No. It's meant to be changed as things change in the city over time. In fact, like I said, later on your agenda tonight, I'm going to be asking you guys for money to totally update it. It's been about 15 years since the last time it was completely updated, and there's a lot of things that we need to change and update based on things that happen in the market and in the industry and what we think is most efficient for this community and best for this community moving forward.
Thank you, Ben. Any final comments, discussion from council?
Yeah, I'll make a comment. I think compelling arguments on both sides. My natural inclination is to not single out any particular category of business, though I understand why the city is concerned about regulating that particular business. I guess I'm saying this to my fellow sorry. I guess what sells it for me is it's a pause. If we have assurances, it's a pause that we're actually going to take time to look at how we want the UDO to look going forward. I don't think that's going to kill anybody. If this is really just a veiled effort at preventing gas stations, which I don't think it is, then I couldn't support it. But I guess trying to take the rational approach here, I guess I can go with a pause. So.
Any further comments, discussion? Okay. I would entertain a motion then concerning ordinance 2022-05.
Make a motion, we approve ordinance 2022-05.
We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second?
Motion and a second from Morris. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
So Keith and Mike opposed? Okay. Ordinance passes 4-2. Council? Okay. That concludes what I have for old business. Is there anything from council? Okay. New business then. First item up is Resolution 2022-05, additional appropriation to Common Council. This is Kevin Krillick.
Go, Mike.
Actually, Kevin, can you pause? I'm sorry.
I signed the wrong one.
Council, we had a, Chief Batch, you want to come up? This was on the Board of Works agenda previously tonight, and then as we were going through the process, we kind of realized that this may have needed to also be to council, have your approval as well. Chief, can you quickly talk about the memorandum of agreement, please?
This memorandum of agreement outlines the agreement between cities and towns, municipalities and townships with FEMA for federal reimbursement for individuals who are deployed in Task Force 1. Task Force 1, I'm sure you're all familiar with what that is. Lieutenant Jason Adams on LFD is a member of Task Force 1. So this is essentially a document for reimbursement of his salary when he's gone. He will be paid through a regular line item, and then this will reimburse his salary while he's gone. And it'll also reimburse the overtime line if we have to use it. So in his absence, if that puts us below minimum staffing, we use our overtime line to upstaff, and this will reimburse that line as well.
So just to clarify, this was, again, reviewed by the Board of Works. We approved it, but because we have oversight of the police and fire departments, but wanted to make sure that because there's a financial component, it may be valuable for you guys to just approve that as well, if that makes sense. Again, this has been reviewed by the Board of Works. We can share it with you. We can hold it if you're uncomfortable with it. But again, this is a standard agreement that IFD has essentially that we sign on to and just, again, reimburses us for that. So, well, the council, I know, kind of sprung on you late on this, but again, we realized it at the Board of Works meeting that we may need to have your guys' say on it too. So, if there are any concerns or questions about this, it's pretty perfunctory. So.
No, sir.
Then I would entertain a motion to approve the memorandum of agreement concerning Task Force 1.
I would move that we approve the memorandum of agreement regarding Task Force 1.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That is approved. Thank you, Chief. And we'll have that for you guys to sign here right now. So, all right, sorry, going back to our regular scheduled agenda. This is Resolution 2022-05, additional appropriation to the Common Council. Kevin Cook.
Thank you. 2022-05 is a resolution for additional appropriation. This is associated with work at the bike park. So for professional services, it's a request to appropriate $150,000 from the sanitation fund to be able to use that this year for consulting services or professional services. Particularly, we're looking at tree clearing. To back up a little bit, IDEM, who we're working with for the reuse of the project, has set forth a lot of requirements that we'll have to adhere to, regardless of whether we build a bike park. And some of that is really bringing the landfill up to standards, which part of that is removing trees. Also then making sure that the site properly drains, and then testing and monitoring groundwater are some of the key things that IDEM is focused on. And really they're things that we should all be focused on. You know, protecting our groundwater supplies and sources are critical. And so not only is it a requirement of IDEM's, but it's something I think that we would all agree is a responsible thing for us to do, since we do have this landfill asset that we need to maintain in perpetuity. So, at the Board of Works meeting on the 28th, we reviewed quotes for tree clearing, and the low quote was for just shy of $150,000. So that's what this appropriation would be used for, would be the funding of the tree clearing. And again, I think that I want to reiterate the fact that this is stuff that we need to do to improve the landfill's condition as it is today, regardless of whether or not the park goes forward. The sanitation fund was established a long time ago for the operation of the landfill. We verified with the Department of Local Government Finance that as long as there wasn't anything in that ordinance that established the sanitation fund that would restrict the use of funds, then those funds could be used for improvements on the site. And we think this is a natural nexus for the use of the sanitation funds, as this is to improve the condition and quality of the landfill long-term.
So to clarify too, current standard wouldn't allow trees to grow on a landfill site, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Current standard would not allow any trees, anything but really grasses, ground covers, small shrubs can be grown on a landfill. And really that's because the root systems could allow water to infiltrate into the buried trash. And then also if you think about large trees, if they were to fall over, that could bring up buried trash with their root systems as the tree would collapse. So those are all the reasons that IDEM looks at landfills, and under modern standards, and our landfill was closed in '87 before some of these standards were enacted, you would not be able to allow trees to grow up. You would basically have a prairie grass type of planting regime over a landfill. You would be monitoring that, bush hogging that a couple times a year, just to keep the woody species and the trees from growing up voluntarily on that landfill cap. And so this would just be part of those steps to get us into landfill compliance, if you will. So again, we opened quotes. Low quote was $150,000. We've been at work on site doing some of that clearing, and we would like to use the sanitation funds to cover that expense.
Just the obvious question that somebody might ask, just because it's becoming a Stoneheater bike park, it is still a landfill.
It is still a landfill, will always be a landfill. If it becomes Stoneheater Bike Park, that will be because we would have a reuse plan approved by IDEM. But that doesn't change the fact that it is a landfill. We would have that that reuse plan, adaptive reuse plan, I guess is the total term, would set out all kinds of restrictions for long-term monitoring. Everything from removing trees as they grow up and how we handle trees. If they possibly, maybe we don't have the boundary exactly where we think it is. We're pretty confident, but if a tree ever falls down and exposes trash, we would have protocols in place for how we address that. We would have protocols in place for someone ever vandalized the landfill in such a way that it exposed trash. All these things would be included. Everything from that to also things like monitoring for gas seeping out of the landfill, monitoring for water standing on the landfill, monitoring the groundwater in and around the landfill, making sure it's not contaminated. So there's a lot of things that will go into our adaptive reuse plan.
Kevin, what's the scope of the work? I mean, are they going to clear cut all 200 and some acres, or what are they going to do?
No, so it's 110 acres is the total property. About 70 of those acres is where we've determined that the landfill existed. And that involved a pretty exhaustive process of basically digging holes on either side of where historic records indicated that the trash line was. And you can also look at historic aerial photos, you can look at the topography of the land, you can tell where the landfill is and where natural grade is. We went back and forth, hopscotching, if you will, over that line to verify where the trash was and finding the limits of the trash. And we have about 70 acres of buried trash. Not all that is wooded, a good portion of it is wooded. So the protocols would be to clear cut those areas. We cannot remove the stumps. Again, nothing that might pull up buried trash. The stumps get just cut off as close to grade as possible, and then we would be layering another layer of dirt over the top of that to ensure positive drainage, ensure that none of the standing water. If you've ever been on the site or been on the site recently, there's a lot of standing water out there. And that's a problem, again, because water could infiltrate through the trash and then contaminate the groundwater supply.
Any additional questions for Kevin from council this
No,
time?
sir.
Okay. Rob, can you read the resolution, please?
Mayor, Council, Resolution 2022-05, again, is for an additional appropriation. It's the duty and responsibility of this council to maintain the fiscal integrity of the finances of the city, and at times it becomes necessary to appropriate additional funds within the approved budget as authorized by Indiana Code. Additional appropriations require a public hearing, of which this council has served proper notice in accordance with Indiana Code. This resolution, 2022-05, is to appropriate funds for professional services for the Stoneheater Bike Park. The following additional sums of money are hereby appropriated out of Fund 6601 for the purpose specified, subject to the laws governing the same. Again, that's in the 3,000 line in the amount of $150,000, as Mr. Krulik indicated.
Thank you, Rob. At this time, then, I'll open the public hearing on Resolution 2022-05. If any public comment, please step forward and state your name for the record. Seeing,
I have a question.
let
myself.
me finish the public hearing
Okay.
first, and then we can, okay, seeing no sudden movements, so close the public hearing on ordinance, or Resolution 2022-05. Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, I'd like to make sure we're talking about, I know it's the same thing, but there's two different names here. It's a landfill, that's what we're gonna fix.
Yeah.
We're not fixing a landfill for it to be Stoneheater Bike Park.
Right.
That may be the salt afterwards, but this is strictly for the dump.
That's correct.
What it is.
So we would, regardless of if we were building the bike park or not,
Right, I understand that.
if we, proper maintenance, ongoing control of a former landfill site, we should have been doing this. This is honestly probably 30 years of oversight from the city, that we didn't have the trees cleared off of it, that we weren't maintaining it to IDEM standards for a closed landfill.
Oh, I
So
understand
so we would be doing this, we would need to be doing this regardless of whether or not we were building a bike park. And that's part of the reason why we're asking it out of the sanitation fund, which
But
is.
the dump came before the idea of the bike park.
Correct, yes. Yeah, and.
So they should
and-
not
and-
be crossed to those in this resolution, in my opinion.
Right, yeah, in the services are for,
Because as far as I know, we haven't approved this bike park anywhere. Other than we said for that, but funding of it or anything else.
you're saying because it mentions the Stoneheater Bike Park
Yes.
in the resolution? So would you prefer that to say the former Lebanon landfill?
That's fine, as long as we separate it from those two things.
Okay. So would you like to propose an amendment that section 1 would read, Resolution 2022-05 is to appropriate funds for professional services for the former Lebanon landfill?
Yeah.
that acceptable?
Sanitary landfill, yeah.
Okay. So would you like to make a motion to amend as
Yes,
proposed?
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion to amend. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second from Mike. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay. Mr. Shine is making a note to clarify that in the final version for that's, okay. Any further discussion concerning the resolution?
No.
Just maybe one quick comment for the viewing public at home. What we're talking about is a historic fund that has a balance in it. This is not a tax increase. This is not, this is not anything that's coming out of any new revenues that the city is creating. So just, I know you guys know that, but sometimes it's good just to let people know that are sitting at home watching this, that this isn't something that we're spending money that we have yet to raise through tax revenues. This is something that was raised over the 60-plus years that the landfill operated, and there was a balance in that fund that we have been maintaining for a number of years, so.
Thank you for that clarification. Any additional comments, discussion?
No, sir.
Okay. This time then, I would entertain a motion to approve Resolution 2022-05 as amended.
I move that we approve Resolution 2022-5 as amended.
We have a motion to approve as amended. Is there a second? Second from Sierra. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That is approved. Thank you, council. Thank you, Keith, for the proposed amendment there as well. Okay, next up would be Resolution 2022-06. This is the additional appropriation to the Common Council. This is relating to the UDO update, as Ben has mentioned earlier tonight. Good, Ben.
Yes, we've already touched on this subject already earlier this evening, and I know a number of us have talked about this previously, the fact that we are due for an update to the Unified Development Ordinance. I have in my hands a proposal from a firm that is interested in doing this project, and they've proposed $85,000 for this. In fact, actually, they had proposed that already last year, and this was something that we had included in the budget, the planning department budget for this year, but it was one of the things that had to be pulled out once we got all the projections toward the end of the process. So we had already been contemplating this probably 8 months ago, and it was, understood that we would try to put it in the budget if we could, but we were not able to, so now I'm coming back to ask for an additional appropriation for that $85,000, so we can get the update process started. I've got a contract already that I'm going to be forwarding to legal to review, and my hope is to have it on the Board of Works agenda for approval the first meeting in April, because I'm not here the second meeting this month, so hopefully we can get that contract approved the first meeting in April and get the process rolling immediately after it's approved.
Any questions for Ben on that from council?
No, sir.
Rob, can you read that Resolution 2022-06 for us, please?
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Resolution 2022-06, again, is for an additional appropriation. Again, it's the duty and responsibility of the council to maintain the fiscal integrity of the finances of the city, and at times it becomes necessary to appropriate additional funds within the approved budget as contemplated by Indiana Code. It's been determined and now is necessary to appropriate more money than was originally appropriated in the annual budget. All additional appropriations require a public hearing, of which this council has served proper notice in accordance with Indiana law. Resolution 2022-06 is to appropriate funds for the UDO updates. These additional funds are appropriated out of Fund 1101 for the purpose specified in the amount of $85,000.
Okay, thank you, Rob. At this time, then, I'll open the public hearing concerning Resolution 2022-06. If you have any comments, please step forward, state your name for the record. Seeing no sudden movements, I will close the public hearing on Resolution 2022-06. Any discussion, comments from council?
I have a question for
Keith?
Mia. What's Fund 1101?
It's the general fund. The fund numbers just changed, so.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, they added where it's all 4 digits now, so it's just 3. So, yeah, general fund. Current balance was ballpark?
12 million.
12 million in the fund? Comments, discussion? Okay. We'll entertain a motion then concerning Resolution 2022-06.
I make a motion, we pass Resolution 2022-06.
We have a motion to adopt. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion is second from Morris. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, that is approved. Thank you, council. Okay, that concludes what I have on my agenda for new business. Is there anything from council? Okay, we'll move on to claims in, and retain a motion concerning the claims.
Make a motion, we pay the claims.
Michael thinks we should pay our bills. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion is second from John.
And I
Is there,
have-
say aye.
I have one other thing.
All those opposed? Claims are approved. Any announcements or discussion?
Yes.
Oh, Mike.
I just want to make an announcement that the Lebanon Kiwanis Pancake Supper will be April 14th from 5 to 8 o'clock. All proceeds go to help the children in the Lebanon community. And I have tickets for anybody who wants them tonight.
Is it doing drive-through or in-person this year?
It's in-person dining this year.
Excellent, very good. Glad to hear that's coming back. Very good. John, you had a
I forgot at the last meeting to recognize Derek Warren and the City of Lebanon for winning an award for the big trail that was held, 3 weeks ago at the
Yeah.
community?
Yep.
And that's a big feather in our cap for what the city has done to move forward on the our Big Four Trail.
Thank you, John. Absolutely. Any additional announcements or discussion? Okay, would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion we adjourn.
Sarah wants to leave, okay. We motion adjourn. Is there a second? Second from Morris. All those for say aye. Aye. Those opposed? All right, we are adjourned. Our next city council meeting will be Monday, the 28th at 7:15 PM. Have a great night.